The public is conditioned to watch the sky. The strategic imagination is fixated on missile plumes and silo doors, a 20th century threat model. This is a fundamental misreading of the battle space. The primary vector for systemic collapse is not a kinetic impact. It is absolute engineered silence. The global economic and military nervous system runs on two physical substrates: subsea fiber optic cables and low Earth orbit satellites. According to RUSI analyses, 97% of all global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a handful of undersea choke points. These are not hardened military assets. They are systemic liabilities. Severing these vectors does not just disrupt communication. It induces a state of sensor deprivation. You blind the adversary. A nuclear power stripped of its satellite intelligence and disconnected from the global financial network becomes a blind leviathan. It loses the ability to verify threats, to distinguish a system glitch from a decapitation strike. This is the forced escalation protocol. When a technologically lagging power cannot compete with swarms of AI-guided drones, the very asymmetry documented by DW in the Ukraine conflict, it must leverage its remaining advantages. Before a full nuclear launch, it will opt to blind the opponent. This act, however, forces itself onto a launch-on-warning posture with no functional warning systems. The blind Leviathan, deaf and sightless, must now operate on a mathematical assumption of worst-case scenario. This is not a risk of escalation. It is a designed mechanism for it. The Ukraine conflict is not a war for territory. It is an engineered solvency crisis. The primary objective is to force the Russian Federation into a state of systemic bankruptcy, where the kinetic cost of daily operations exceeds its economic capacity to continue. According to analysis from institutions like RUSI, the war itself has become the Kremlin's single greatest domestic liability, an unpopular, high burn rate operation that creates unacceptable internal political risk. This economic pressure is then weaponized on the battlefield. As confirmed by outlets like DW, Ukraine is deploying AI-guided systems, but the true accelerant is the cheap asymmetric drone. This strategy inverts the cost curve of modern warfare. Each destroyed Russian tank is not merely a tactical loss. It is a multi-million-dollar asset being liquidated by $1,000 munition. The defending power is being bled dry not by an opposing army but by a spreadsheet. When a nation's conventional military becomes a net liability and it cannot compete on the new, technologically asymmetric battlefield, its strategic options narrow to a single point. Weakness forces a pivot. It must leverage an asymmetric advantage of its own, one that can instantly reset the entire strategic equation. For a state like Russia, this is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty dictated by the crisis protocol. The only remaining tool that can impose catastrophic cost on its sponsors and force a strategic halt is its nuclear arsenal. The system is not broken. It is functioning as designed. It corners the target, leaving the nuclear option as the only perceived path to national solvency. The entire escalation protocol is driven by a single brutal economic equation. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, places the kinetic cost of a modern main battle tank at approximately $5 million. The cost of the AI-guided FPV drone that neutralizes it is $500. That is not a typo. It is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry. This isn't warfare, it's asset liquidation on an industrial scale. The conventionally superior force is forced to trade its highest value platforms for what amounts to consumer electronics. The math guarantees their insolvency. This is the democratization of violence. The term is clinical, but its meaning is systemic. It signifies the collapse of the nation-state's monopoly on high lethality kinetic force. What once required a trillion-dollar military-industrial complex is now achievable with off-the-shelf components. As documented in Ukraine, AI-driven targeting allows these cheap systems to operate with devastating precision. A proxy force can now inflict unsustainable attrition on a superpower. The battlefield is no longer a chess match. It has become an economic bleed-out. When a state's conventional assets become liabilities and it cannot compete with the new asymmetric economics of the battlefield, it is pushed into a solvency crisis. It is strategically cornered. Its only remaining asset, with a positive return on investment, is its nuclear arsenal. The injection of this technology is not designed to win the regional conflict. It is a feature, not a bug, designed to force the adversary up the escalation ladder, turning a kinetic event into a vector for systemic risk. The conflict model being perfected in Ukraine is not designed to remain in Ukraine. It is a template, a blueprint for export. According to data from DW, the mass deployment of AI-guided systems has created a laboratory for asymmetric warfare. This laboratory is now seeking new staging grounds. Analysts at RUSI identify these staging grounds as gray zones, regions of managed instability. Observe the recent anomalous travel warnings from nations like Canada regarding South Africa. This is not a signal of random chaos. It is a market indicator that a region possesses the required internal fractures to serve as a proxy laboratory. The function of a gray zone is to externalize kinetic cost and risk. It provides a testbed to inject disruptive technology against a rival's proxy assets, draining their resources and forcing an operational response. The objective is not to win the proxy conflict, but to validate the escalation model and push the primary target toward a solvency crisis. This selection process is mathematical, not political. The gray zone must offer plausible deniability while being strategically significant enough to compel the target's engagement. CSIS reports confirm this strategy. Use pre-existing regional instability as a launchpad, introduce an asymmetric technological accelerant, and force the conventionally superior power into a binary choice. Accept attrition or escalate to a new domain. This is the calculated path to triggering a launch-on-warning posture. The final safeguard is a protocol known as launch-on-warning. It is not a strategy of retaliation, it is a strategy of preemption based on sensor data. The logic is brutal. If early warning satellites and ground-based radar detect an inbound nuclear strike, you do not wait for impact confirmation. You launch your own arsenal while your command structure is still intact. Waiting for detonation is a mathematical guarantee of total asset liquidation. This protocol was designed for a world of physical radar dishes and reliable satellite feeds. It was not designed for the current battle space. Analysts at CSIS and RUSI have modeled the critical liability, the fog of digital war. An asymmetric cyber attack does not need to destroy a satellite. It only needs to blind it, or worse, feed it a convincing phantom. A sophisticated AI can spoof the exact heat signatures and trajectory data of a full-scale launch. The commander now faces a zero-sum choice with incomplete data. Is the radar blackout a system error, or is it the electronic warfare precursor to a decapitation strike? The protocol dictates that in the absence of information, you assume the worst-case scenario. The fear of being paralyzed, of losing the ability to respond, becomes the primary accelerant. You are strategically forced to launch based on a ghost in the machine. This is the end game of injecting asymmetric technology into a proxy conflict. By forcing a technologically lagging nuclear power into this digital trap, you create a solvency crisis at the highest possible level. Their only remaining leverage, the nuclear arsenal, is triggered not by an actual attack but by the programmed response to being blinded. This isn't a system failure. It's a feature of fourth-generation warfare. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. For every dollar of asymmetric AI hardware deployed, the conventionally superior power must now expend exponentially more to defend legacy assets. This equation is unsustainable, a mathematical certainty of a solvency crisis on the battlefield. The accelerant is already in the system. Deutsche Welle confirms the deployment of AI in Ukraine's kinetic operations. This is not an upgrade. It is the trigger for the next phase. Unable to compete symmetrically, the lagging power is forced by strategic logic to leverage its remaining asymmetric advantage outside the primary conflict zone. According to CSIS and RUSI modeling, escalation does not begin with a launch-on-warning protocol. It begins with a calibration shot, an attack on economic architecture, engineered for maximum impact with zero forensic attribution. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a cascading attribution impossible blackout targeting a primary Western maritime port or a Tier 4 data center cluster.